Okay, so welcome to Silicon Valley Community Energy Audit Committee meeting. We're sorry that Chair Brian we have trouble with his recording his sound. So I'm going to start the meeting right now. And let's call the meeting to order. Please, roll call, please.
Yes, please. That would be excellent. Thank you, Hung Wei.
I'm sorry, Chair Mikachek. Vice Chair Wei.
Yes.
Director Chua.
Present.
And for the record, Director Martinez Beltran is absent. Thank you.
Okay, now we're going to public comments on matters not listed on the agenda. Is there a public I don't see any public attending, so I'm going to close the public comment session. Okay, let's go to consent calendar.
Present.
We're moving to consent calendar to approve minutes of the March 3rd, 2021 Audit Committee meeting. Do I have a motion?
I move that we approve the minutes.
Thank you. Do I have a second? I'll second it myself. Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any discussions? Seeing none, let's take a roll call.
Chair Mikachek.
Aye.
Vice Chair Wei.
Aye.
Director Chua.
I don't think I'm on that meeting, so I'm not sure.
I believe if you read the minutes, you could still approve it.
Yes.
Aye.
Thank you. Passes 3-0.
Great, thank you. Now we're going to the regular calendar. The first one is development of controls introduction. And I don't have the name of the presenter, so maybe Girish, you can help me with that.
I can introduce Jim, Girish. Yes. So I'm pleased to introduce Jim Steele. Jim comes to us from Management Partners, and we've engaged. And Jim's going to give a background on himself and Management Partners, so I won't go into his background. So we've hired Management Partners to work in 3 main areas. One is helping us with our budget modeling to basically revamp the model so we have the flexibility with which to manage the financial operations of the organization and produce the kind of reports we need. The other is looking at our financial policies, and they've already reviewed the reserve policy and the budget policy, which we took to the Finance and Admin Committee and to the board last week, which will be up for board's adoption. The revisions will be up for board's adoption at the September meeting. And also Jim and his team is going to help us with the investment policy, looking at how better ways in which we could be investing our funds. And the other area, one of the most critical areas that Jim and his team is helping us with is the internal controls. As we're maturing, we need to develop desk procedures and make sure we have identified key internal controls. As SVCE staff, we've already identified areas where we need help. There are certain areas where we think we need better desk procedures and delineation of controls. In addition to those areas, Jim and his team are also more comprehensively looking at the organization's business processes to make sure we can minimize operational risk. With that, I'll turn it over to Jim.
Thank you, Amrit. Am I on and am I being
Yes.
heard? Thanks very much for that introduction. So my name is Jim Steele. I'm with Management Partners. Management Partners is a local government consulting firm that was founded in 1994 to assist cities and local governments, towns and special districts across the United States, but primarily in California, to help them work more effectively and more efficiently. Our firm has over 100 consultants, and we vary in our practices and our specialties in finance, public works, human resources, planning, community development, and best management practices. Our team was...
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
can you hear me?
Okay. I'm having difficulties here.
I'm having
and
difficulties here, and what
I'd like to do as chair
What
of the
I'd
audit
like to
committee
do is
is
chair
ensure
of
that
the
we
audit
cover
committee
three key things
is to
so
ensure
that when
we
I
cover
leave the meeting, I know that
three
we're in good
key
shape.
things, so that when
First thing I'd like to
the
make sure that we
meeting,
do is
I
identify
know that
any
we're-
internal controls and weaknesses, if
we're
any,
in good
that
shape.
our auditor should plan for. The
First
second is
thing
to
I'd
identify
like to
key
make
estimates
sure
for
that
the auditors
we do
to
is
address.
identify
And the third thing is
any
identify
internal
key
controls
transactions
and
for the auditor to
weaknesses
address during their audit.
that
And I'm sorry if I'm,
that our
if there's a
auditors should
background.
plan for. The second is to identify key estimates for the auditors to address. And the third thing is identify key transactions for the auditor to address during their audit. And I'm sorry if there's a background.
So Brian, we have trouble hearing you. Girish, do you have do you get what Brian says?
Yeah, Brian, there's the financial audit kickoff, which is, I think, what you're talking about. So I think, Vice Chair, if we want to kind of incorporate his comments, and given where we are right now, and also that Director Chua is going to be leaving at 10:10, one thought is to move item 4 up so we can go through that and then move to items 2 and 3.
Okay.
Garesh, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Is that better? I tried to shut off this other microphone. Okay, and forgive me for kind of jumping in. That's great. We can readjust the agenda. I want to, and I'll repeat, I want to make sure that we cover key issues relating to the audit so the auditor can anticipate and plan for those issues. That's the must-have in my mind for this meeting. And I want to have a separate conversation with our auditor without management present, but I can do that offline, not part of this meeting. The first item I'd like to do is make sure that management identify internal controls and weaknesses, if any, that the auditor should plan for during their audit. And if those conversations have already been had, then we're good. But I just want to make sure that Brett can ensure that we're in good shape there. The second thing is to identify key estimates for the auditors to address. And for example, accounts receivable and the provision for accounts receivable is a key item. There are other estimates that are in the financial statements, and Amrit can have that conversation and just make sure that the auditor is planning for those. And then the final thing is identify key transactions for the auditors so that as they plan for the audit, they make sure that they are going to address those transactions, and rather than having the auditor stumble across them or find them, we identify them in advance. And I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself from what I said earlier, but that's what I want to cover and ensure that we cover to fulfill our responsibility as an audit committee. I'll go on. I'm done. I can go on mute now.
So if that's okay with Jim from Management Partners, and we can move number 4 to above number 2 and 3. May I have a motion for it?
So
So
moved.
moved.
I second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Roll call, please.
Laurie, you're muted.
Lori, we can't hear you.
We've got a motion in a second, and
Yes.
Yep, Brian, we're having
I'll
some
say
technical
aye.
difficulties. Just hold on a second for the vote. Lori, you can't unmute yourself. Okay, so Lori, why don't you sign off and sign back on, and then Nick will try and get you. Kevin, do you want to just take this vote, please? And if you would unmute yourself, Kevin? Oh, you can't unmute yourself either.
I can unmute myself. Can you hear me?
Yes.
we can.
Okay, great. Thank you. Could we have a roll call vote on the motion to move agenda item 4 forward in today's agenda?
Yes, please.
Vice Chair Wei,
Aye.
Director Chua,
Aye.
Chair Mekachuk.
Aye.
The motion passes unanimously. We'll be moving agenda item 4 forward to discuss next on our agenda for this committee meeting.
Thank you, Kevin. Okay, so we are going to, on the agenda item, financial audit kickoff discussion. May I know who is leading this?
Yes, this is going to be headed by Brett Bradford from Vicente and Brinker. He's our external auditor. You've met him before earlier in the year when he presented the audit results for the last fiscal year. So he's about to kick off the audit process for the current fiscal year that's going to end in September 30th. And we'll talk about the processes. So with that, I'll hand it over to you, Brett.
All right, welcome, Brett. You're on.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you. Thank you, Amrit. I don't think I could have outlined a better list of bullet points myself than Director Mekachuk just provided. So to dive in with information coming from our side, as was just mentioned, we are planning for the audit for the year ended September 30, the organization's fiscal year end. So we've had preliminary conversations with Mike Maher and his group on the timing of the receipt of documents and receipt of the draft financial statements. And we believe things are in line there with our usual delivery dates. Also, Director Mekachuk was nice enough to take the time to organize a couple meetings about speaking of in the realm of large, significant, unusual, so to speak, transactions of the power purchase, and Amrit also organized that. And so I've been in, I think we've had 2 to 3 meetings on that now, and I think we're getting our arms around that in a better way with each meeting. So we're feeling like we've got a good understanding of that transaction so that we can respond with our audit procedures there so that that's adequately addressed and disclosed. Ms. Lifto is on the call here too, or on the Zoom here too, is the audit manager working with all of our CCAs and working with Silicon Valley for a few years now as well. Ms. Lifto, do you have anything to add to that? And maybe we can, after this, we can put the questions back to the committee regarding any known issues or weaknesses, internal control matters, things like that. Ms. Lifto may be frozen.
Frozen and muted. I am having a Zoom day. It's been this way all morning. I'm going to turn off my camera. Nothing off the top of my head. I know he mentioned significant accounting estimates. We look at the accounts receivable, the allowance for AR. We look at the accrued energy as well. Some of the significant accounting estimates that we do look at. If there's any that would like to be discussed, we're open for that as well.
Yeah, the primary one that we give the most attention to is definitely the allowance for doubtful accounts. We incorporate our knowledge of what's going on in the industry as well as the larger macroeconomic environment into developing our expectations there. And generally those are, which is not a surprise probably, those allowances for doubtful accounts are trending upward now in response to some customers' inability to pay their bills.
Okay, do you have any, does any commissioner have any questions? I see Commissioner Trot, Evelyn Trot. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. I remember now, I was on the last March meeting because I remember Brett speaking. My question is, well, on a postmortem of what the incident that happened to us, well, please give us at least two takeaways from that incident, and how are you addressing them?
Sure. I mean, the takeaway one is that we did have Girish and Amrit did call a special meeting with us, which we very much appreciated. We like hearing about those type of things prior to, in the midst of the audit always. And then the recognition that some additional controls and an additional examination of some potential weaknesses there has now, it seems like that's been recognized. And I take it with the involvement of Mr. Steele from Management Partners that, that will be one of his areas of focus. So that's very good to hear. Anytime we hear about management deploying more effort and thought towards internal controls, that's always good from the auditor's perspective. But the other thing that we took away from the information that's been provided and discussed thus far was that given the scope of the organization's operations, that it probably would not be material from my perspective, as in this is something that must be called out in the audit report. Of course, the audit report, and I'll distinguish between the auditor's report, which is our opinion letter, which every year thus far, and we would see no reason why it wouldn't be different this year, essentially opines on the material accuracy of the financial statements. And then the financial statements themselves, which are prepared and the disclosures that go into them are all based, of course, on the accounting requirements as opposed to auditing requirements. I don't think that it would be material such that it should be called out there. If the organization wanted to call it out there, that would be your option, of course, because those financial statements are, of course, management's product prepared under with the oversight of the board. But those are my two takeaways. Aware of it, attention to internal controls, and from my perspective, not material requiring special attention in terms of disclosure in the financials. Maybe that's three takeaways.
The follow-up question I have, Brett, is there a change in the way you audit because of this incident?
No, because, well, I mean, certainly we're going to be interested in what the plan is for the Management Partners or any other areas where internal controls have been identified where they would like to beef them up. But in essence, given, we look at things under the standards for, what is material to the financial statements and look at the controls relative to industry standards and point out or make observations depending on the severity of what we may or may not observe as to their adequacy. And in terms of our material understanding of the controls and their adequacy, we did not find them lacking. Now, that does not assurance that nothing could ever happen, because you're still involving human beings and the ingenuity and creativity of fraudsters as well. So nothing is ever certain. However, we were not going to say, well, because that happened, now we have a material finding under weaknesses in internal controls. If that helps, if that answers the question. I know that was a lengthy response. Okay,
so in essence, it's really up to us, but we're doing everything now. And I know Girish and Amit are doing, more than what I expect for them to do.
Yeah.
Thank you for that answer. Thank you, Vice Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Trot. And I think Girish has your hand up. I'd like to go to the public comment. If maybe Girish, you go first.
Yeah, just to address Director Chua's question also. One of the items that we skipped was the IT audit. So we really get into in-depth over there. And we even have the folks who are conducting the IT audit and gap analysis who can provide you more information on specifics around IT security. So we'll come back to that.
Thank you, Girish.
I'll jump in
Mhm.
and ask Brett if he is going to rely on that audit, the additional audit procedures in planning for the audit.
From the consultants, Director Mekachek, is that?
That is correct.
Well, we would always look at a document like that if it's available. And just as like we would look at any internal documents that management may prepare itself, regarding internal controls. And we do that in effect through every year through obtaining updates to the processes and procedures, looking for holes in that regard, changes that we need to look at, that type of thing. That said, I don't want to speak for Mr. Steele and his organization. I doubt a final product would be ready by the time we're looking at issuing. Always happy to look at a draft. Myself, being a consultant technically, I know that not always feeling comfortable with folks passing around drafts of their work product as well, so that may not be doable. I would ask management though, if during that process, as they're going down that road, that if any significant holes or gaps are identified, I would certainly love to hear about it, even if it's even just a verbal communication.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll do that, Brett. And the focus with management partners is to minimize our operational risk. I wouldn't say that there's a gaping hole that we see right now. There are areas in which we know we can enhance our controls to minimize operational risk, and that's where we're coming from.
Hey, so before further discussion, I'll open up for public comment, but seeing no one, no public is attending, I'll close that comment period. Do we have more discussions and questions for Brett? No, seeing none?
Yes,
Yeah.
I'd like to make sure that as chair, I have a conversation with Brett before year end, and that can be just a phone call. And then the other thing is, I would like to ensure that we go on the record as saying, if there are, actually, I want to make sure that the auditors are independent going forward, and if there are any issues that they find during the audit, that they should be confident that they've got an open channel of communication to the audit committee. So just make sure that we sort of tick those items off the list going forward. That'd be great.
All right, thank you for the comment, Brian. I think that will be on record on the minutes. If seeing no discussions, we're going to close this item and go back to item number 2. And it is development of controls introduction. And welcome back, Jim Steele from Management Partners.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes, we
Great.
can.
Let me just say a little more about the background of our firm, and then I'll go into the 3 areas that we're focusing on. So I had mentioned that we have over 100 consultants working with us. On our team, besides myself, also involved is Don Rhodes, who supported SVCE while CFO was being recruited. He worked earlier this year, I believe late last year as well. He assisted during the budget process. And with me also is Pete Gonda, who has a background in public sector purchasing, and Claire Coleman, a financial analyst. My background is I was finance director for a number of years for the city of South San Francisco, and then assistant city manager. Prior to that, I was a budget manager and treasury manager for the city of Palo Alto. I've been with Management Partners for 4.5 years. I've worked on various organization reviews and special projects looking at finance operations. I've assessed possibilities of mergers between overlapping districts and participated in fiscal sustainability studies for cities. So now to move on, and Amrit mentioned this earlier, our engagement contains three main components. We were hired by the CEO to look into these and to assist your staff first with creating a budget model that would be in place for next year. And this would be a model to assist them in bringing things together kind of in an efficient way and enabling them on a periodic basis to update the board on financial results as far as budget to actuals. The second is reviewing financial management policies and reporting practices and making recommendations to the CEO for improvements. This is already underway. We've started working on an investment policy, and I believe Amrit mentioned earlier that there was some work on reserves and budgeting and reporting that you may have seen. We participated in some of those discussions and documents. And then the third is preparing internal controls and desk procedures for the CEO and staff in accordance with best practices. This is a critical part of our engagement, and it's looking at internal processes. The first one is underway, and it has to do with executing power transactions. Right now, my colleague Pete Gonda is mapping out the steps that he sees currently, and he'll be suggesting alternatives and improvements to that, working with your staff. And then the next set of processes after that we have is to look at the settlement and payment process. As far as other internal controls, we'll need to discuss that further with the CEO as far as what hours and priorities remain. We expect our work to be completed in December, and it's well underway at this point. I'd be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Do we have questions from the commissioners?
I don't have any questions, but I do have a comment. I'm absolutely delighted to hear that we've got your team on board and you're going to be helping going forward. So that's fabulous. Thank you.
That's great. So let me open it up to public comment first. Seeing no one is attending, I'll close the public comment session, and then we'll go back to Commissioner Tra.
Oh, thank you, Chair. I echo what Chair Makachak said, and really excited and reassuring that Girish and Amit are really focusing on this. It reassures us that we're ready. I mean, we're getting there. And thank you for doing that, both of you. Thank you. Thank you, Chair, Vice Chair.
Thank you. Okay, I echo both commissioners. I'm sorry, I can't hear you. All right, can you hear me? Okay, I echo both commissioners' comments. So if there's no question for Jim, we're going to close item 2 and go to item 3, which is internal technology audit updates. I believe we have 3 presenters from 3 vendors. I think probably in this order: Abbott, Stringham, and Lynch, and then Hutchison and Bloodgood LLP, then Securcom. Welcome on board, and let's start with the first presentation.
Thank you, Vice Chair Wei. I'm going to provide an overview. This is Kevin Armstrong, Administrative Services Manager, of the 3 different audits, and then we'll actually be inviting Securicon to present their information first. At least that was the intent. I know that the order has gotten a little bit scrambled, so I'll check in with our management analyst to see if they're queued up and available, but we'll announce the first firm when they're ready. We'll bring them on board as I'm presenting the overview.
Okay, sounds good, Kevin. Go ahead.
So Nick, if you could advance to the next slide. So as I noted, we have 3 different audits underway or planned for this year, 2021. And they cover 3 different aspects of overall information technology. The first, which is currently in process, is the most broad. It's generally termed an IT audit, an information technology audit. And as I said, it's currently in process and we expect it to complete in September 2021. And I'll provide a little more detail on that in a moment. The second is a mandated audit from the CPUC. That's the Advanced Metering Infrastructure, or AMI audit. It's conducted every 3 years, by requirement of the CPUC, and we'll be starting that later this year. The third is by this firm SecureCon. It's a security review and gap assessment. It's really focused on external threats, so cybersecurity issues. That is also underway, and we expect that to be completed by the end of this year as well. Next slide, please. So as you noted, there are 2 firms that are working together to conduct this first audit, the Information Technology, or IT audit. This is a voluntary audit. SVCE has been engaged in this process for 4 years. So this is our 4th consecutive year. We've added to the scope each year, but it's primarily a review of our existing processes. So it looks at what we've been working on so far, and less as much looking ahead and looking at gaps. Currently, it's underway. We started this process with an RFP in early 2021, before March, and the firm was awarded the agreement, the contract, in early March 2021. So the timing was definitely interesting with regards to other events. So based on that sort of schedule and process, we are receiving preliminary findings currently, and we'll be able to share some of those today from the presenters, with a final report expected in September, at which point we'll be able to report back to this committee on the results of that audit. Next slide, please. The second audit, as I mentioned, is this AMI, or Advanced Metering Infrastructure audit. It contains an audit. It's being performed this year by Abbott, Stringham & Lynch, also part of the team doing the IT audit. As I mentioned, it's mandated by the CPUC and occurs every 3 years. And it's an audit of how we handle customer data from the meters, from the smart meters. So it involves how we control and maintain access to that information so that our customers are protected, and so that data is not leaked outside of SVCE. The results are due to the CPUC in April 2022, but as this is a mandated audit, all of the CCAs will be undergoing this audit in the near future. And given the number of firms that are able to provide these services, we wanted to get ahead of that queue. So we're ideally aiming to start that process early, well in advance of that April 2022 deadline. So we anticipate starting work in November, December of this year. Next slide, please. The final audit is another voluntary audit, and this is one that we initiated this year based upon earlier events. And unlike the IT audit, which is often or much more review of current practices, this is really forward-looking. It's really to think about and assess the environment out there. As I mentioned, it's got a cybersecurity focus, so that includes ransomware, phishing, other human behavior and security issues. So this really looks at what is happening out there and how are we adapted and ready to react to that. As Director Elahi mentioned in a previous meeting, what is the next battle that we need to fight, not the one that we've fought already. So it's really trying to look ahead at those items. And so, as I mentioned, this was something that we've initiated in response to current events. And ideally, looking forward into future years, this would be something that we would coordinate more directly with our overall IT audit process. But this year, there's definitely some overlap between the two, but that's why it's additional this year rather than being sort of wrapped in. Back to the next step slides real quick, please. So I was going to say, just as a follow-up for today, after these presentations, we'd certainly love to receive your feedback. As we receive final results from these audits, we will present those to the board. Some of them will be presented potentially confidentially, as they make security recommendations that we don't necessarily want to 100% disclose in terms of names and details. But we can certainly provide updates to the board publicly and specifics confidentially. In addition, I wanted to note that as part of the upcoming fiscal year budget process, we have allocated several $100,000 in funds as part of the finance and admin budget, excuse me, for these remediation efforts and countermeasures that are to be identified as part of the final audit reports. So we'll be working on those in the coming months as well. And I think the key thing to discuss and share with this committee and the board will be our efforts to prioritize those based both on the work that we've done already and the potential for impact to SVCE going forward based on the likelihood of those threats out in the environment. So that is an overview of the three. Nick, I believe that we've invited some of those firms to start. Will it be Securicon presenting first as we had anticipated?
So Kevin, before we go
Yes.
to
Oh,
presenters,
yes.
maybe
Yeah,
I'll
any
ask the
questions?
commissioners do we have any questions for Kevin?
Yes, please.
So
That
I
was
have,
very
yeah.
comprehensive, and thank you for that overview. I can't see the slides, but you explained it quite well.
So my request is, Kevin, can you send the slides to us?
Absolutely.
Commissioner Trott, do you have any questions for Kevin? If not, we'll go to the presenters. Thank you, Kevin.
It's just a comment. Oh, I'm muted. Oh,
Yes, we can
We
hear
can hear
you
you,
now.
Director.
okay. It's just a comment. It's just so refreshing just to see, looking back. It's looking back at the past and what we have now and getting ready for the future. We got it all covered. And thank you. Thank you. Thank you to the SVCE team.
Thank you for the feedback.
Okay, Kevin, we're ready for the presenters.
Fantastic. It does look like we have Securicon lined up.
Hello, can you hear me? This is Malia Siegel with Securicon.
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, fantastic. Sometimes I've been in technology for 30 plus years, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. So
I agree.
So I believe I am also joined by my Director of Critical Infrastructure, Ford Terrell. Ford, are you also on?
Yes, but
I'm here.
Oh, fantastic. Alrighty then. So to kind of begin, let me just say that Securicon is a 20-plus-year-old information security consulting firm out of DC. We do about half our work with the several three-letter government agencies that when I first joined, they were a little frightening to me, these three-letter agencies, but our pedigree is with the government, doing work with Cyber Command, the Department of Defense, etc. And we were contacted by Nick earlier this year about, could we take a look at your network infrastructure, basically at everything you do from a security perspective. So we have begun that engagement, and what I wanted to do is kind of share what we'll be going over today. First thing is to review the scope. We're going to go over exactly what it was that we were contracted to do. We'll also review the methodology that we used for that. And then, because we are in process of the engagement, and I believe Ford may have some updates on that, any remediation recommendations or key takeaways are kind of to be determined. So with that, what I wanted to say is the scope of this security review. We initially had a scoping call with Silicon Valley on May 4th to go over what all they were looking for and what we could do. So as you will see on the screen, our mission, if you will, was to identify and document the critical vulnerabilities that could lead to reduced integrity, confidentiality, or availability of your critical data. When I mentioned earlier that about half of our business is with government agencies, the other half of our business is with enterprise clients mainly with a critical infrastructure bent, whether that's utilities, refineries, pipeline companies, as I said, water, electric, and so that is where we come from in terms of what our core competency is. The other thing in the scope was to review your network devices and your architecture, just to take a look and see how it was segmented, how everything's put together, and also to conduct a security program review. What does Silicon Valley instruct its users to do in terms of security? What do they have in place in case something does happen, that kind of thing? And certainly I'm going to let Ford go into much greater detail with this. And then lastly, we are performing a gap analysis. In other words, how does what Silicon Valley have compared to industry standards, most specifically one called NIST. So with regards to the network architecture review, I'm going to turn it over to Ford and let him kind of, sorry about that, discuss what is inclusive of a network architecture review, the security program, and the gap analysis. So Ford, I hand it over to your capable hands.
Definitely. So on our kickoff call, we discussed a number of frameworks that we could use to actually assess your security program and network architecture. What we decided to go with was the Center for Internet Security top 18 critical security controls. So this framework evaluates your policies, plans, and procedures surrounding security best practices for your organization. It also assesses how you implement those security controls. It takes into consideration things like automation and reporting, first prioritizing functions that are effective against the latest active advanced threats with a strong emphasis on what actually works, type security controls. The assessment took place between July 26th and August 6th. As Melina said, we just submitted the draft report today. But what we did is we performed a series of interviews from on August 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, talking to not just your lead, but whoever could provide evidence to, for instance, account management. You might say you're managing your accounts a certain way, but what's the evidence showing that? Is there a policy? Is there a system output that can show us how you manage your accounts? So we kind of take all of that into consideration, and then build a kind of a rating on is your policy defined? Is the control actually implemented, and to what level? Is the control automated or technically enforced? And is the control reported back to the business? Are you actually taking the report back and making adjustments based on it? So we take those 4 factors into consideration when kind of building your rating. So after those interviews, our consultant actually takes a look at all of your network architecture, all of your policies, all of the information that was provided. A whole boatload of information was provided for our consultant to go through to provide your actual rating on the 18 control sets. We have not gotten to like I said, the report was just finished and draft submitted, so we haven't gotten to the actual program briefing and the gap analysis, which is actually where you are versus where you need to be. How do you advance your program to the next step? What's the gap between where you are now and where you want to be?
And Ford, if I might jump in real quickly, one of the things also with the network architecture review, they're looking at everything: firewalls, how's your network segmented, servers, really every piece of gear that you have in your network. They're taking a look at how it's set up and is it secure and can it be backdoored, etc. So I just wanted to point that out. Sorry, Ford.
No, that's okay. That's all I really have. Just to let you know that we are available to go into detail at any time you'd want to for this report, and to explain our ratings in more detail and explain the outcome in more detail.
Okay, so thank you for the presentation, Malia and Ford. I'm coming back to the commissioners. Do we have any questions before we open up for public comment? Oh, no, we have other presentations, but let's get the questions first.
Oh, for the,
I have no questions.
Okay.
I have a
Commissioner
question.
Chua? Yeah.
Thank you, Vice Chair. For the network architectural review, did you physically look at the setup in terms of the, I'm not looking at the cyber, I'm not looking at the, what about the setup? How are you able to, I don't know if you have or will be doing, are you doing a physical walkthrough on the setup of the network, or how are you doing that?
So this was performed 100% remotely. We did this through a combination of looking at all forms of evidence. So network maps, policy, actual interviews, talking with employees about how these things are actually implemented, looking at all manner of configurations that we asked for and were provided to us gratefully. Yeah, we did not actually do a walkthrough. And for this type of security program review, this is looking at your program as a whole. So really all we needed was evidence to show. We sometimes perform physical walkthroughs, but most of the time that isn't necessary, as most of the evidence can be gained from actual configurations, actual policies, or actual outputs from your tools, which in some cases were asked for. If you have a tool that, for instance, an intrusion prevention system that performs something towards one of the controls, sometimes we'll just look at the output. We'll look that your output actually says, hey, this was acted on, we blocked this. So it's that kind of evidence that we look for, just to see that, okay, here's your control, here's what you say you're doing, and here's what shows you're actually doing it.
Is that difficult? Is that, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, Molly.
Well, just quickly, I wanted to also dovetail off of what Ford was saying. So there's essentially levels of engagements that we can perform. This, if you will, is the first level. This is taking a look at how everything is put together from the evidence, et cetera, looking for, are there vulnerabilities? Where are the places that could be hacked, if you will? Then there's another level where we can actually, and we haven't, we wanted to get this out of the way, but we can also take it a step further and literally act as one of those bad actors, if you will, and see how far into your network can we get. So that is something that certainly we can do. In this engagement, it was really just, let's take the first step at looking to see what you have, what is in your network, how is it segmented, and like to conclude what Ford had to say.
Okay, thank you both.
So to summarize, you looked at largely management's representation and you did a limited amount of verification of that. And that's what the scope of the engagement was. Did I summarize that accurately?
So I'll tell you, for every single control, all of the 18 controls and all of the, each control has, anywhere from 6 to 12 sub areas and areas that we have to check to see if you actually comply. For each of those, we found evidence in some form or another that you either are or not doing it. And if you're doing it, to what level are you doing it? The only thing we didn't do is to say, okay, you say you have your firewall and security in place, you either are or not doing it. Here's how you actually perform, which is what, as Malia was saying, what that actual network, assessment or penetration test is for. It's to say, okay, you have all of these in place. Here's what your people are doing. we have that set. How do you actually perform in the real world against an adversary? So we did not take it to that level, but all of the evidence for every single control was validated as a part of this program review.
Thank you for explaining that.
And at any point that you would like, you know, part of what we do is go into a deep dive on what the findings were. So we look forward to presenting that to Silicon Valley, and I'm sure it will be shared with you. But anytime you want to talk to any of us, we're here for you.
Okay, thank you for the team from Securicon for the presentation. May we also have a copy of the slide?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you. If there's any more questions, we're going, Kevin, we can go to the next presenter.
All right, thank you all for your time.
Good. Thank you. Thank you, Malia and Ford. Kevin, do we have other presenters on board?
So Nick, have you checked in with ASL?
Yes, I just sent them an email to join, so they should be here in a few minutes.
Okay. Just one overlapping detail. Given the nature of the two audits this year, we had intended and hoped to stagger their presentations so as not to have the results of one firm inform the other. Again, in the future, we'd like to do this in a more coordinated manner. This year was a first go at these two different types of audits. So we'll be, we hoped to sort of keep them slightly apart, give them a little space. So they've been notified and should be on in just a moment. But appreciate all the questions for Securicon, and here they are arriving just now. So we'll have Chris White from Hutchinson Bloodgood presenting on what I called the IT audit, and it will be Steve Carter presenting on the AMI audit. Chris, if you're able to unmute, you should be up next to talk about the IT audit.
Welcome, Chris.
Everybody can hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. I'm ready to go if we are.
Please do. Go ahead.
So for this year's IT audit, we wanted to make sure that we were covering not only the normal technical items that you want to cover in an audit, but also that the whole information life cycle was included. So that's things like policies and procedures, data classification and governance, really a deep dive into how SVCE leverages technology to do its business. And the first part of that is selecting a framework so that we can evaluate against something. There's a lot of frameworks that you can pick from, NIST, COSO, COBIT, ITIL. There's one for the SOC family. There's one called CIS Top 20. And what we do for these types of engagements is go with NIST CSF. And the reason we select NIST CSF is because it's not so onerous and overbearing that it expects you to have an IT department of 50 just to execute it. But it covers all the key components of a modern cybersecurity environment. And it's really kept up to date with the environment that we're in post-COVID. So we use the framework as our baseline. We evaluate SVCE's controls. So that's how things are done against the framework. And we use a number of tool sets to help us gather information about the environment. And those tools make up the internal and external penetration testing, which is where we put on our bad guy hat and we say, if I wanted to compromise SVCE, how would I do it? We put on our I'm inside SVCE and I'm a disgruntled employee hat, you know, what damage could I cause there? And we put on our, I'm just a hacker for hire, trolling the internet, looking to cause trouble. You know, how vulnerable is SVCE from that perspective? So the penetration testing part is very focused. Vulnerability assessment is a little broader scope in the sense that we're looking at things like patch management for Microsoft and third-party software. We're looking at configurations of network devices and of that software. So it's not just, do you have a firewall? It's, is it configured according to best practices? Now, does it have the licensing and the subscription to do everything that it needs to do in 2021? We're looking at, you know, are user accounts provisioned in a timely manner and disabled in a timely manner? All variety of things that they kind of get overlooked in a lot of assessments, but they're very much low-hanging fruit for the bad guys. So we don't want to skip over something just because it might be perceived as minor in the big picture. So after penetration testing, vulnerability assessments, we move into the overall information security program as a whole against the framework. And we make recommendations, whether it's to the technical controls, how you might approach doing something, to the business controls, how something is thought about, or how something might change coming from the pre to post COVID universe. And just a general holistic look at, are we doing everything we can to protect SVCE, to protect our subscribers' data? And of course, all of this is done with a CPUC AMI data umbrella over everything, because we do recognize that that's where the bulk of our risk as a CCA lies. So when we move out of infrastructure and, okay, am I going to run out of time? Is this too much information, too little?
You're fine.
Okay. So data classification and governance is very important to companies that aggregate data or process, distribute, you know, farm out for processing. And that's because we have a tendency, all organizations have a tendency to acquire it, put it in a box, and then we don't always keep track of how many storage units we move that box to over the preceding years. So it's a focus on what are we collecting? How and where are we storing it? Is it encrypted where it should be encrypted? Are the access permissions to it managed and effective the way we think they are? A classic example of that is, you know, the accountant is very confident in the financial system. No personal information will leak out of the financial system, except when they run the report that they send for the benefit plan audit that has 401k info on it, which includes social security numbers, and that Excel file stays on their desktop forever. Now it's very easy for data to just kind of make its way out unintentionally.
Excuse me, Chris.
Yes.
One of our board members is going to leave in 4 minutes.
Okay.
So if you would keep that in mind, maybe.
Okay, let's skip to the next slide. So for our finding summary, we reviewed the first bullet point is really for things that are external facing. So it's your website, it's your DNS records, which is how the internet knows to find Silicon Valley and how Silicon Valley knows to find resources on the internet. We looked at some of your applications that are internet facing on different domain names. There were a couple of areas related to mail delivery, which is making sure that if you're sending email out, it has the highest chance of being delivered and not filtered as spam. And when you're receiving mail, that your system is configured to be very diligent about whether this email claiming to be from the controller asking for a wire transfer is really from them. When we move away from strictly external assets, we looked at your Microsoft 365 tenant, which is really the nerve cluster of all of your day-to-day operations. We found it was configured in accordance with best practices for security, which is evaluated through something called the Microsoft Secure Score and some other checks of audit logs and things like that. So two thumbs up for that. We looked at all the internal network devices, both for best practice configuration, security configurations. No issues there. First party patch management, which is primarily your Microsoft stack, was very effective. And the reason we care so much about patch management is because most exploits leverage a vulnerability that has already been fixed by a vendor. Oftentimes it's been fixed a long time ago. Although they're increasing, 0-day vulnerabilities where software is vulnerable and there's no remediation available are still a small percentage of the overall threat landscape. The third-party patch management, which is software that's not Microsoft, so Chrome, Adobe, Zoom, WebEx, that's an area that needs a little improvement. And it's very common to see that because there are not as many good tools for going out and saying, of all the software on every computer, who has updates and how do I get them? So we've been working with Nick to improve that. We didn't find any problems with user accounts that were hanging around, say after employee termination, or privileged accounts that shouldn't have been there. Again, Nick is doing a great job keeping control of the environment and taking the security responsibility seriously. Configurations for things like encryption on mobile devices were set. They're set correctly, they're enforced, and we didn't find any outliers, so no concerns there. And in the vulnerability scan, this graph might look a little scary, but you are never going to have a completely clean scan where zeros are across the board. There will always be something to improve. What we look for is that there are no criticals, because criticals are a combination of it's easy to exploit and it's very dangerous when it is exploited. The highs were related primarily to third-party patch management. So while they do need to be remediated, the remediation action is fairly quick and easy. And then the mediums and lows are about what we would expect for an environment of SVCE size. And that's because there will always be old software that maybe it just can't be patched anymore, or maybe that printer has a bug that's only exploitable in very specific situations. And we're not worried about someone breaking into the SVC office to attack a printer. If they're that dedicated, they will come from another avenue. So from a summary standpoint, we see, I would say, almost all the CCAs over a 3-year time span, with the exception of 1 or 2. And SVCE is much better prepared than other CCAs of a similar size, or even those that are larger, but maybe they're related to a municipality, so they don't get the attention to IT that they really need. We're very pleased with the approach that Nick and management are taking to keep cybersecurity front of mind and to keep the safety of subscribers' data in mind. It's very easy to say, oh, we really like this vendor. They're going to do something with our data. Let's have them do it and not worry about it. And in the world we're in now, where it's very easy to become a software as a service provider, but very hard to become a good one, vendor due diligence, vendor management are very important. Specific to the AMI data, we found that it was the storage and management of it was well designed and executed. It wasn't sprawled all over the place, some over here, some over there. The protections around it are appropriate for the type of data, what you're doing with it. Like we talked about a little already, third-party patch management is really the area in need of the greatest assistance right now. But in the grand scheme of things, I would rank that fairly minor compared to what we could have found and what we do find at other CCAs. The policies, procedures, and governance documents, pardon me. The policies, procedures, and governance documents need to be reviewed a little more regularly, especially when there's a major business or technology change, so that we get more into the habit of, when we make a system decision, when we bring on a new big vendor, when we change how we're doing something, or we add a line of business, we look at them then. And we look at them annually just to make sure there's nothing that sticks out at us, so that they get fewer forklift upgrades where we're looking at them and saying, oh, we haven't looked at this in 3 years. All of this has to change. And we're doing more, well, this paragraph should be changed to say that this is how we're doing business now, and this one should be changed to reflect that we added this capability and took this one away. But overall, Silicon Valley is excellently situated from a cybersecurity perspective, not just compared to other CCAs, but in the SMB space at large. And we're very happy to assist, facilitate, participate with Nick and the SVCE team to help keep this mindset going forward.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Commissioner Tra had to leave, but we're going to finish the presentation. And do we have any questions for Chris for now? I think Chair McIntyre is still on the phone, right?
Yeah, he's on listen mode. He can't speak, but you won't see his hand up. So
okay,
he may just have to break in.
Okay, so I have a question for Chris. So the recommendations you recommend to SVCE, for further for further prevention, maybe? What would you work with SCV to staff to work on it, or it's just recommendation for the staff?
We work with SVCE to come up with recommendations or to come up with remediations that work for them. We, as a company, and because our background is not just IT audit, it's in the trenches, IT being there when the server breaks down. We always try to be very consultative in these types of engagements, because it's one thing to say, oh, your house has a crack in it, you better fix it. And another thing to say, well, the house has a crack, and so these are some ways we could address it. This is what we should do now. This is what we shouldn't do now. And we always want to be available to SVCE to help in that manner. It's just how we do business.
So mostly preventive methods before things happen.
Yes.
Yes, very good. Thank you. Brian, do you have any questions? If not, we're going to let Chris go. I believe we have one more presenter, right? Kevin, do we have
That
one
is
more
correct.
presenter?
Steve Carter with Abbott, Stringham and Lynch will speak briefly. This is the mandated, what Chris called the AMI audit or the AMI audit, upcoming later this year.
Okay, I think we're ready.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Kevin. And good morning, everyone. Very nice to be here in front of the audit committee and the board. So I'll go briefly through, first introduction. I'm an audit principal, which is synonymous with a partner in the firm of Abbott, Stringham and Lynch, a CPA firm located in San Jose. We've been working with Silicon Valley Clean Energy for a number of years now, not only with the AMI audit or AMI audit, but also your Green E program as well. And to some extent, your CPUC, or excuse me, California Energy Commission reporting on your labels for power source disclosure. So I'll go briefly through today what is entailed with the MAI audit that's required by the CPUC, the California Public Utilities Commission. So first, a quick definition. AMI stands for Advanced Metering Infrastructure. Basically, in a layman's terms, this is the smart meters that are predominantly out there now, put in by PG&E. And so what it does, the audit is focused on how you use and gather your covered information. And covered information is primarily that information that can be used to identify either an individual or a business customer. So hence, it's focused around privacy. So what we look at through our audit procedures, and again, this is done every 3 years. And so the 3-year cycle is up at the end of 21. We're going to be looking at how the covered information is properly identified and protected. Is it defined as primary or secondary purposes? And I'll get into that a little bit as to the distinction between those. And then we're going to review and test your compliance with your written policies and procedures around how you gather and use and disclose any CI data handled by Silicon Valley Clean Energy. We also, in conjunction with Chris's team, again, look into the IT infrastructure and how all that information is gathered and protected and used and analyzed either by third-party applications or internally for program assessments and new ideas on how to market additional programs. And then we conclude with an overall compliance report that's in line with what the CPUC in their decision 12-08045, which outlines what are the requirements that CCA has to go through to ensure that you're adequately protecting this covered information. So as I said, this report is, or this audit is done every 3 years. We render what's called an agreed upon procedures report, which is an at-test engagement. At-test meaning that only a CPA firm can sign the report as evidence of the procedures that were performed. And an agreed upon procedures is one that is basically what it is that between us and Silicon Valley Clean Energy, we agree upon the focus of the procedures to meet the intent and spirit and reporting requirements set forth by the CPUC. We're going to do a little bit different this year. There's a tight turnaround. By April 30th, these reports have to be into the CPUC. So our plan, since we're working consistently with you, we're going to start this work hopefully in November, December to get a jump start on it. So we're not, rushing at the end to get everything done. So I think that'll work very well. We can obviously leverage off all the work, the internal IT audit work that Chris and his team has done. That's going to be very, very beneficial in meeting the objectives and requirements of the focus of this audit. Happy to entertain any questions.
Thank you, Steve, for the presentation. Do we have any questions from the commissioners? I guess, Brian? If not, this concludes the presentations. I'll open up for public comments. Seeing no public is attending, I'm closing the public comments and come back for discussions. Any discussions from the staff or commissioners? I guess you made a good presentation, Steve. Okay, so this concludes this item, and all the presentations will be emailed to each commissioner and will also be on the Silicon Valley Clean Energy website for further review. So if I don't see any other questions, I think we'll go to future agenda items or next meeting date. Girish, do you want to report on next and set a next meeting date?
Yeah, Amrit.
So I don't think we have set the next meeting date. I think we're following up.
We did just set it. Yes.
No, we did.
Andrea managed to get out a doodle poll and oh, sorry, for the audit committee. My apologies.
Yeah,
I was thinking finance admin. Yes.
Finance and admin, yeah. So for the audit committee, the next meeting we were thinking of having is when the audit that Brett talked about, the financial audit, is completed, which would likely be early next year. That's what we were thinking.
Okay, so we have time to plan it.
Yes.
Very good. In the meantime, if each commissioner has questions, they can direct the questions to the staff and to the consulting companies, right?
Yes, and we will schedule the one-on-one meeting between the chair and Pacenti and Brinko. So they have that one-on-one meeting.
Great. Okay, so if there's no further business, I think we can conclude the meeting. So meeting's adjourned. Thank you very much. Sorry, we have some technical difficulties here and there, but it happens. Okay, see you next time. Thank you.